Hi, folks. Thanks for being here. I know that it is always a bit of work to be in Vegas and to come to a conference, and currently it's even more work, and we get that. So we really appreciate you being here, and we hope that there will be some cool stuff that you will take away from today. My name is Merritt Bear. I'm a principal in the Office of the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, here at AWS, and he is walking around, so if you see Steve Schmidt, you really did see him. He's here. And in my role, I do a mix of internal and external initiatives. So internally, I help us as a security shop that runs on AWS, and then I hopefully translate that into the empathy to talk to customers who are running their own security shops, right? And I'm happy to engage with folks. We have contact info here. Feel free to send me a note on Twitter or send me an email. I will one day have an inbox that I read. But anyway, no, I'm really happy for folks to, hope we may have time at the end to also take some questions, I hope. But we have a lot to cram in here today. So we're going to kick off. Thanks again for being here. Like I said, I'm a principal in the Office of the CISO. I've been here 3.5 years-ish. I came from US government. I've worked in all 3 branches doing security on behalf of the American people. And looking forward to talking to you today about ransomware. I actually, fun fact, I did my interview for Amazon about ransomware in the cloud because it was one of those things that I felt like we should be paying attention to, 3.5 years ago, and so here we are. So thanks for being here, and we will kick off. Meg,
awesome. Hey everybody, my name's Megan O'Neill. I'm a senior security specialist, solutions architect. So what that means is I help customers solve problems around security and help them build secure foundations. I've been at Amazon now almost 4 years, but I've been in IT security, over 15 plus years, showing my age a little bit. But yeah, I'm super excited to chat with you guys. And the ransomware conversations, one I've been having with customers one-on-one, oh man, I think we're up to 35 conversations. So I'm excited that we can scale this conversation for you today. And my hope is that you guys get something actionable out of it, can take it back and analyze your environments and beef up your protection.
Yeah, a disclaimer, we are not gonna give you an easy button. It's gonna be all the hard work that you already kind of know you should be doing. But let's get into it, right? So what is ransomware? Let's do a couple definitions because I think it's useful just to kind of set the stage here. There are 2 main strains that we're seeing, right? One is where the bad actor crypto hostages or deletes your data, and the other is where they exfil it and then they demand a ransom to not make it public. And those 2 strains are important because in part what we're talking about is backups and recovery are not the only antidote here. Because if they can hold you hostage for a ransom, then just the threat of disclosure could be its own worry. So I think one of those elements means that we need to focus even more on protection and on identity and other hard things that occur before they would ever get to the point of getting to you exercising your backups. And I think this will entirely feel a lot like eat your veggies, and that is true. But there's a lot of new ways to think about security, and these are not going to highlight security services that we want to sell you. We are not in sales. We are security geeks. So we're going to talk about how functionalities that already exist in cloud will equip you better. And I think the point is, 15 years ago, someone could get into your network, but so what? And now there's a monetization strategy. And so there's sort of I looked it up for this talk. There's the folklore that Willie Sutton, the famous bank robber, when they said, "Why do you rob banks?" He said, "Because that's where the money is." It turns out he never said that, but it has turned into sort of a proverb, which is to say, follow the trail, right? Go where the most obvious trail would lead. And I think that's relevant to today's conversation around ransomware, in part because we're rarely talking about 0 days here. We're really talking about knowable stuff that's out there. And in fact, ransomware actors are democratizing it down. You can buy ransomware as a service. You don't even have to be good. And the point is that on your side, and what I hope you will walk away with today, is the idea that like, you don't have to. Like, you don't have to let these actors make you scared, but it's gonna be all the hard work that you already know that you need to do to get your house in order, right? So thinking through this, kind of cool, again, researching this talk, I learned a little more about our history here. So ransomware goes at least as far back as 1989. There was a medical conference focused on AIDS, and there was someone there who handed out floppy disks that when you would insert it, it would crypto lock. So it ended up being written in, some early hacking journals that were paper, as the AIDS virus, because it had been an AIDS conference. And they were demanding payment to a PO box in Panama for $189. And I guess the point is, like, this is not new, but what we are seeing with the newness of it is both the monetization, obviously the rise of cryptocurrency and the rise of the monetization strategy there, like the, rising prices of things like Bitcoin. You would not be surprised probably that when I walk around Miami where I live, I get a lot of bros coming up when I'm wearing an AWS crypto shirt that say like, have you bought Dogecoin yet? Like, crypto is for cryptography. But at any rate, the rise of cryptocurrencies and the ability to wash them and so on, has contributed to this inflection point that I think we're at right now. And I think there's an element to this that even if it's uncomfortable, will be process driven. So as we think through how to combat this or how to, best protect yourselves, we're gonna be talking about a lot of the best practices stuff that is not sexy. The White House obviously has paid attention too. They issued a memo, and we're quoting Ann Neuberger here from the NSC. So thinking through just, I think there's a lot of current collision between the fact that during COVID, hospitals have been held ransom, for example, and the fact that the White House is paying attention. And so you're gonna see your legal and compliance and security teams kind of converge on this as a definition point. And so I think if you need more foot stomping, you can point to things like this that give you a little bit more ammunition to bring to your executives. And one of the points that I would urge you all to take back, assuming you're all security, like I am in the audience, is to bring it to your executives before you have a bad day and get their buy-in, because they're gonna answer that pager and you would prefer them to do it when you're game daying it.
Yeah.
So I actually had written this slide with like a little bit more forceful language, but I was coached that it should be an invitation. I had titled it Grow Up, which I think is also an invitation / command. But the idea is that this could be a useful prompt for your shop to do the stuff that you already know you should be doing, but also to focus in particular, given the current landscape, on the ways that we know we can help you robust your architectural decisions. And a lot of these, like, ultimately, of course, there are ways that security has changed in the last 10, 15 years, especially given cloud, right? You're not gonna get into the host to do your forensics, that's on our side. It's gonna look like login monitoring to you, but like, congratulations, you don't have to worry about that. It will look different though, and so thinking about how the controls that you are in control of are things that you can make better over time is really the goal here. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about this, but I think my goal for this talk is to have you walk away feeling more empowered and feeling like, these jerks can stuff off.
Awesome. So we're going to start with minimizing human access, and you might be wondering, hey, this is a ransomware talk, not an identity talk, but in AWS, it all starts with identity. It's really important to make sure that you've got a strong identity strategy, and we're going to walk through some of the best practices. And even if you've been a customer of AWS for multiple years now, it's time, if you're worried about ransomware, to go back and look at these things and make sure that if there's anything hanging out there that doesn't follow best practices, it gets cleaned up. So we're gonna do a bit of a review on those identity best practices, and then we'll move on. So we're gonna start with human access to the environment. It is absolutely best practice to federate user access into AWS. This means you could be using an existing third-party federation provider, or AWS SSO, but you're mapping those existing Active Directory groups into IAM roles so that your users get short-term access. And this is via the console, this is via the CLI. What we don't want to have is our developers with static long-lived access keys. We want to reduce as much as possible the use of static access keys. We unfortunately still see customers struggle with security events due
Everyone
to...
repeat after us, no hard-coded, long-lived credentials.
Yeah, just don't do it. Don't do it. And if you have to, let's talk about if you have to. There are some small use cases like hybrid access on premises into AWS where you maybe still need to do it, or a third party that's not running on AWS can't do the assume role. And if you still actually have small use cases, what I would recommend you guys do is actually add this to your risk register so that you can track them. Get these static long-lived credentials on a quarterly user access reviews that you probably are already doing, for those highly privileged accounts within your Active Directory domain, for example. Make sure that if they're interactive, if someone's signing in, you've got MFA applied, so they have to have that second factor. And then look at that access policy that's attached to those users and make sure it's as least privileged as possible. So no delete, right? These are like create only or put object in an S3 bucket. No wildcards whatsoever at the actions or the resource level. And that's really gonna help a lot. And I would say that if it is between like on-prem into AWS, for example, ask the 5 whys. Why do we have to do it this way? For example, if you're running Jenkins on-prem and you just don't want to build a Jenkins server in AWS, it's way more secure to be running an instance with an instance profile attached to it for those short-term credentials than for your Jenkins cluster to have static credentials into your AWS environment. So really think through why was that set up that way and can I do it a better way?
I want to pull a thread out of there, which is something Meg is living, but also to just pull out for a second. Whenever you're doing your security metrics or your COEs, in our case, we call them cause of error reports, and this doesn't mean that it ever reaches a downstream user, but just that it didn't go according to plan. Were these known risks? Had we assumed them? And if it's unknown, that requires more investigating, right? And so thinking through how you can drive to zero with your metrics. And as you look at well, yeah, we always have a certain number of unpatched instances because we're doing, malware analysis on what folks can do, for example, for us. Okay, we need to know exactly how many that number should be. And the rest of the dashboard should be 0. So thinking through how you pull out some of these best practices into ways you can authoritatively, declaratively give your engineers guidance so that they don't burn out from human unrest, and also so that you don't have bad days.
Yep. All right, next best practice when it comes to identity is to make sure that your AWS resources are using IAM roles. And what this means, for example, EC2, you can attach that instance profile to the EC2 instance, and whatever applications running on that instance can utilize those for short-term credentials, as opposed to a static secret, for example, that you're using to access a database or RDS, for example. You can use that instance profile to get those short-term credentials. Now, if you have a legacy database, for example, that's installed on EC2, and you have a secret that you need to manage, put it in Secrets Manager. Utilize the instance profile to decrypt that secret on the bootstrapping process for that EC2 instance so that the rest of the time it's encrypted in Secrets Manager and it's not sitting there for someone to misuse, right? That's what we're trying to avoid here. Now that we've talked about human and AWS access, let's talk about starting to pare down and scope down privileges. And for me, this really starts with looking at all of your AWS accounts at the organizations level. And how many folks are using organizations? Just show of hands. Awesome.
Yay, that warms our hearts.
Of that same group,
Hearts are warm.
of that same group, who's using service control policies or SCPs?
To govern down your...
Okay,
Awesome.
I would love to see everyone who raised their hands for orgs to also raise their hands next year by this time for SCPs. Because service control policies help you start to minimize what services you want to be used in the AWS environment. That's one of the key use cases. Another key use case for SCPs is to have some of the common services that are used as security guardrails. So for example, CloudTrail, you want CloudTrail to be enabled for all your AWS accounts, and GuardDuty to be enabled for all of your AWS accounts.
Again, coming back to that logging, monitoring, or your forensics now, you need to enable yourself to have the data that you will parse, right? And so this is a cloudy approach, right? You're gonna have to get sophisticated about your data because every API call is in CloudTrail, even those attempted that didn't go through. So every KMS call, for example, is gonna be there. That could be hundreds of thousands at scale. And you're gonna have to figure out how you parse those. Well, you start by having the data. So what Meg is referring to is putting authoritative, declarative controls in SCPs that say no one can turn off CloudTrail.
Yep. So that's the second use case, is restricting folks from being able to disable those key services once you've enabled them in the AWS accounts. And the last use case is to restrict regions. Because as a security practitioner, if you're looking at all regions in AWS, or if you haven't enabled GuardDuty in every region, what security monitoring are you doing? So those are kind of your choices. Enable it everywhere, or restrict it at the SCP level.
You can do block public access. Your developers may get mad at you, and then you'll have a conversation.
And so when we look at scoping down user level permissions within AWS, Access Analyzer is going to be a great tool. And they've actually come out over the past 6 months, year, with a lot of new features that I want to make sure you guys know about so that you can utilize this to scope down permissions in your environment. This is an area that we've got a lot of customer feedback on. It's too hard to do. And so that's why we're really pushing more features with IAM to help you do this. And so the most recent feature that was released for Access Analyzer is policy linting, and actually providing you guys with security recommendations. So when you author a policy, you now get the IAM policy grammar checks, which is like, wow, what did we do before this, right? You'd have to use your linter and your VS Code or what have you. And so now it's available in the console, but it also helps evaluate, like if you are not following security best practices for your IAM policy authoring. So if you put a wildcard in there, that's not going to be best practice, right? So highly recommend taking a look.
Not in your policies.
Yeah, love it. Another key feature that was released recently was Access Analyzer can actually look at a specified time range across your CloudTrail logs to tell you what access a policy should be. So if you initially gave access to your developers, for example, that was broader, and you can run the Access Analyzer across a specified time frame, and it'll provide you with a policy of what they've used. So maybe it's time to start doing, hey, should we swap this out? And as long as you have a fast follow mechanism for if they do need to change that IAM policy, like a pull request, for example, then it shouldn't be like a blocking mechanism for a developer to update that policy or to request that the policy be updated. So you should feel empowered as long as you have those mechanisms for a fast feedback loop. And
no, go ahead. Are you?
Yeah, and the last item is Access Analyzer can actually help you determine if there's a principal that has access outside of the environment. So if you have a S3 bucket, for example, and another account has access to that bucket, or if that bucket is public. So Access Analyzer can actually do some analysis of external access and inform you so that you guys, as a finding, it'll provide a finding to you that actually gets automatically sent back into Security Hub. You can review those findings and say, hey, was this intended or unintended? Was this accidental or something I meant to happen? And this is a really great way for you guys to, on a regular cadence, ensure that there's no large cross-account access that's happening that shouldn't be there. And this is actually all done with automated reasoning.
Yeah, let's kick in there. So one, cross-account rules is one to be aware of as you're thinking through your ransomware posture, right? That's incredibly critical, especially if you're thinking about your key management. So I'll just side note that, but so I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about what automated reasoning is, because what we're talking about here is, again, of course, you know what the cloud is. We maintain those lower layers of the stack, and you do the controls on top. Well, what that really means is that you're interacting with infrastructure as code. So you're doing security as code. And what we learned, I don't know, it's like 5 or 6 years ago, we started a group called Automated Reasoning. And it's a bunch of math PhDs. I'm a total fangirl of theirs. And they do what it sounds like. So it goes at least as far back as Euclidean mathematics. So you don't go out and try to count every prime number. We accept the infinitude of primes to be true. And if you can do provable security, that is a very high degree of assurance. And the only way that you can do that kind of math is through those software layers where you're interacting with that infrastructure as code. So one of these elements that I love to talk about is like the ways that it will feel different to do security in the cloud. And this IAM Access Analyzer is one product that we have externalized. There's also part of Inspector that used to be called Tyros that is network reachability. So without sending a single packet over the network, you can know whether you have an internet-facing endpoint, for example. And that might also satisfy your compliance requirements. So PCI requires that you have none, or that you know of them. And we actually have VPC reasonability as of this reInvent as well. So without having to trigger a detective control, you can do reachability before you deploy. And there's something really beautiful about that interaction where you're doing security as code. All right, you're all gonna be like, I know the term zero trust, and my executives seem to like it. Isn't this kind of that? Yeah, kinda. I mean, so zero trust became this term that, you know, I don't think it's obviously, sometimes I have like a notebook here where I'll be like, this notebook is zero trust, nothing comes in or out. The point is not to like put stone walls, right? The point is to have like an intelligent use of controls. And I think from our conception anyway, the idea of zero trust was to reduce possibly down to zero the relevance of an actor's location in your network. And that actor could be a human or it could be software, you know, if we're talking machine to machine, but to reduce that relevance and therefore have improved one's security. And I think there's a false choice between the idea that you need to pick between traditional perimeter-centric controls, things like a VPN or a VPC, you know, the perimeter is dead, long live the perimeter, and those fine-grained identity-centric controls. So things like SCPs, security groups, NACLs. So what our conception of zero trust is not only that they should be used in combination, but that they should augment and be aware of one another. So an example of that might be a VPC endpoint policy. But we're also talking about the fact that like every API call goes over the open internet with no inherent trust. It's protected by SIG-V4. And so there's some element of zero trust that we live. And you know, in 2002, Jeff Bezos issued an API mandate that said, we will only have front doors. Everything security does has to come in the front door too. And we will not compromise on security, but it's gotta come in the front door. And I think that's a commitment that we continue to live, but that also it continues to be hard. Simple stuff that's hard to do. But we live that. And so I think thinking through this in those terms is also helpful. And we live that as your cloud provider. And we continue to, like, there is just no button that says, vend me your KMS plain text keys. You don't have it. We built it that way. And same thing for Nitro, right? Like, there are inherent security characteristics that we built into it. It's functionality, it's availability, it's no, you know, patching with no downtime, it's live update. Yeah, that's it. CIA, there's the A for availability. That's a security inheritance that you get as a product of our prioritization here. And I think I'm really proud of this part of how we build. All right, so infrastructure as code. I think this is cool, obviously. What we're talking about is really the ability to take what a, you know, or like 100-page binders that were living under someone's desk and say, what can we write? What can we take out of people's human decision making? I get really sick of folks blaming humans, like, oh, humans are the softest layer. Okay, well, there's a lot of technical ways that we can help get better. And it's not gonna be done, right? I mean, when Meg was talking about least privilege, like, we don't think that least privilege is an end state. It's a goal. You prune toward it. But you get better at it because Access Analyzer can identify, escalation paths that haven't been used yet and shouldn't exist, or, permissions that look like they shouldn't be there. And so taking advantage of that in the sense of democratizing down through your codification, we joke in AWS Security that we hire lazy security engineers. We want them to never solve the same problem twice. You never close a trouble ticket unless you've scripted the remediation, if it can be scripted. And that means that you minimize that gray area of human decision-making down for truly novel or really high-stakes decisions that get escalated and then I wake up. But that you minimize down that human decision-making, and you know how you do that? Over time. You build those accretions. You solve big problems by solving small problems. You write the code for this, you build it on top. It's layers of sand.
Yep, and back when I was first a customer of AWS in 2014, we didn't have as much prescriptive guidance for customers at that time.
Meg was at a big international retailer.
Yeah, and I was, the rest of the security team was super focused on security product implementation that wasn't going well. And there was just me working on the cloud with some other engineers, and I was like, as soon as our devs get a hold of AWS, they're gonna go crazy. They're gonna have fun with it. I knew that the scale was gonna take off, but I was only one security person. So I thought to myself, our standard process for doing our waterfall approach for security assessments as we shepherd a new system through into delivery was not going to work for our AWS environment. So what can I do to enable the developers to get it right the first time without the heavy hand-holding that was in place in our waterfall approach? So what I actually did was I looked at the security requirements that were most common and that our developers were most familiar with, which as a retailer, it was PCI, payment card industry, the DSS. And I translated those requirements into, initially it was just a checklist, but it was something that using developer language, like, hey, your security groups need to be least privilege. Here's an example of a not secure security group. Here's an example of a secure one. You need to use least privilege IAM roles. Here's an example of a policy that's not least privilege. Here's one that is. Really kind of helping them understand and be clear about what are the requirements that we expect you to have in the environment. Whether you're new to security or not, here's what they need to be. And here's examples. And then over time, what we actually did was created CloudFormation template snippets that they could literally plug in to their CloudFormations. Today, you could use something like a service catalog to actually have, here's our standard version of a secure RDS deployment, for example. And so this really helped empower them because number one, those requirements were clear to all of them. It started with a self-service checklist. And if they struggled with any of those areas, they could literally start a Slack session with somebody on the cloud team, which I was at the time. And so it was we don't want them to be blocked, but we know that they're gonna be building, and we need to enable them to do the right thing.
I've seen enforcements of this go in a lot of variability, right? You can choose how you enforce them and how prescriptive you are versus how permissive, and that will be some of those business decisions that you make and that you bring to your executives. But one of the beauties here is just that enforcement mechanism. The idea that you can, rather than rely on good intentions, you can actually prescribe it and enforce it. So one of the ways to do this is a technology is CloudFormation Guard 2.0. So this is kind of a neat, again, I'm gonna pull my head out a little. This is just an example rule, but the idea that we can write security prescriptive guidance in a way that is enforced in a security mechanism is just not as cloudy, right? This is something fairly new. And I think, so for example, this one does checks that AWS server-side encryption is enabled on all three S3 buckets. There's no excuse not to have everything encrypted in cloud. You can do it natively, you can do it, automate that, turn that into something that is just prescribed, right? But also, this mechanism that allows you to enforce it is part of the beauty here. And one of the things that Meg has kind of alluded to, but that I live with a lot as well, I get into a lot of CISO conversations where they say how are your devs not mad at your security team all the time? How are you guys not just locking horns or, and it sounds like aspirational speak, but we democratize down. So we have, right now it's at like a 1:8 ratio, but we have a security engineer embedded in every dev team. And these aren't just clean code reviews, right? You can do a lot of automated reviewing through Code Pipeline and Code Guru and some of the open source tools and some of the AWS tools. This isn't about clean code. It's about security mindsets when you make decisions. Do we have an internet-facing endpoint? Have we put this in a VPC? And some of these are things that actually, what we have learned is you don't have to hire a security person. You tell the person, this is your job. You put on your security hat. And now, are you worried about this? And they'll be like, kind of stresses me out. Yeah, it's doable, and we are still evolving this ourselves, but this is one of the things that we work on is to embed security decision making. As you know, you can't just bolt this on after the fact. We have an AppSec process, and they're awesome, and it is not necessarily bolted on after the fact in the sense that they're like latecomers, but they are sort of, we have a current question, yeah.
Sorry, I mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. What are we here for in person?
Security engineer embedded in dev teams.
Yeah.
You also said pointed out six job.
Yeah.
Those two things sound like they're solving the same problem. All right,
Yeah, I'm talking about the same kind of human ratio, but I'm saying we might take a developer and say, cool, you're now a security person for like the next cycle.
When you say security engineer embedded in dev teams, it's not necessarily a security engineer that you pluck from your security squad.
This sounds like one of those questions. It's like, this is not so much a question as a comment, but.
No, it's not.
But that's fine. That's fine. We'll take this. We'll take this.
We want security as a culture in our environment. We want teams to take on their own security. And we want security teams to be the leaders of that, not necessarily just managing.
Right.
Because, hey, these some people you talk to figure this out. I'm curious about, because you guys are obviously doing it very well, I'm curious how you incentivize those dev teams to take on security practices like they matter, and that they're not the thing that's just in the way of the
Yeah.
job done.
All right, so the question for folks who are listening in was basically like, how do we, as a shop that has been working on this for a while, how do we do that? How do we embed those security engineers who may not even be security engineers into this role and make it work, I think, right? So I think the answer is, what I was trying to say is like, a lot of times folks are looking for security on a resume. I'm totally fine with someone being a dev who we teach how to think about the risks here and how to quantify them, and are they known risks or unknown? And like that is a much more knowability, like put your security hat on for the rest of today. Because as you know, devs are gonna be like, yeah, let's just start and like move on, make it work. Right, good intentions are not enough. We don't rely on humans, we guardrail everything, and no one gets out of that. Like they are constrained within our environments, but also everything. And I would say increasingly today, things like in dev and test are as important as prod because real data is real data, and we're in a ransomware attack. So I would say we do it by sort of emboldening folks to own it. And it sounds so obvious, but when you tell whatever, Claire or Mitchell or Chad, like, you are the security person on this team for the next, or sometimes that 1 to 8 headcount. So we have this conception of a 2-pizza team in Amazon dev cycles. I'm sure you've heard of this. But that is a security decision, right? Very few people will understand how the components work under the hood. That's intentional. We silo on purpose. But there's also elements of that then, so sometimes it's 4 people on that team, and you're telling, Dan, you're 1/2 of a security person on this team. That's what we're doing now. I mean, we're not perfect. We work on it. That's what we do. The idea is that we get better over time. And part of this then comes back to metrics, right? So which teams are hitting the guardrails the most? And are they hitting the guardrails because our guardrails are a little off or because they're off? And how do we look at the last month of trouble tickets? And how do we automate those away? Or how do we, what are you doing with the last month of your GuardDuty findings?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we guardrail a lot, but we also have a very permissive environment. We do a lot of detection and remediation and escalation. So I mentioned like executive escalations. They trigger automatically. Every person who has worked for AWS, including us, I'm sure, they have their own sort of sandboxed account that they can play around in. And every person, you meet an AWS employee, you'll be like, when did your VP get called? Because it just triggers automatically. Blameless escalations, but that's just a culture. So you know that your executives are going to have to answer the phone for security. But hopefully, it's not in the New York Times, right? The point is, 100% of executives will say they care about security. So what? You mechanize it, right? You turn it into a mix of guardrails and detective and remediative controls. And of course, the remediative part is also like really beautiful in the sense that like all of these, so we're talking about config rules, like just the visibility around configuration drift. That's novel. Like a security person from 10 years ago was worried about the rogue server under someone's desk. That's not your focus anymore. So that's why I say, like, don't get me wrong. Whenever people say, like, when did you get into security? I'm like, when was I not a security person? That is an odd question. You know, this is my jam. But at the same time, I think you can put those glasses on. And like, if I were to tell you, like, why don't you walk through this casino and think about what it would be like if you were a child and you had to find ways to escape, or like, no, you don't walk through the world thinking that way, but you can. It's your ability to be a human and to imagine. You know, computers do some things well. Automated reasoning group, they just use what computers are good at, parsing incoherent policies that may be attached to a resource or an asset or a user. You know what humans do? We iterate, we like make up stuff out of nowhere. I mean, here I am giving a talk out of the top of my head, so. All right, feel free to raise your hand because I think the most important part of a live talk is the interaction. So, yes, Eric Brandwein said this before, but I think this is also a point. If it is not someone's job, it's a hope, and a hope is not a plan. One of the Amazonianisms that we have is this belief in mechanisms. So good intentions are not enough. Everyone believes they're a good person. Good intentions are not enough. And part of that is something that we can control with technology policies. But the other part is stuff that we just believe are ways that we will articulate through lowercase p policies. So for example, we have quorums around escalations or around, like, you're very unlikely to get 6 insiders who are all turned, right? So we have certain ceremonies and things that are just human level. Obviously, we also have the technology level. So no human in a data center who has physical access will also have logical access, period. But we also have, like, you know, rituals around how we talk about escalations and how we get folks on the line to do that. And I think, again, we're not perfect. If you know better, come tell me about it, what you're doing that works. So AWS Security Services for monitoring, again, these should turn, hopefully, into things. So, I mean, who is not using a trouble ticketing system? Yeah, exactly. It's like the worst thing and we're all captive to it. But what are you looking at in terms of your time to respond, time to remediate, obviously? Like, how are you capturing those data? One of the things that I sometimes start conversations with is, like, if you had all the data in the world, let's just, like, I get that you, Chad, are the CISO, but, like, let's pretend like you're the CEO and you're trying to make money and you're out there. Like, if you had all the data in the world and you could reason on top of the data, what would you do differently? They're like, well, you know, what if you did? I mean, in the security world, it is mirroring that, right? Because security is not only a business enabler in the sense that, like, we can't get stuff done if it's not secure, or like no one would use our service if it's not secure, but also in the sense that the value proposition of what you're delivering has inherent security value that you're proposing and that you must live up to. And so part of that means that you're delivering that in ways that get mechanized. So you're looking at, you know, on this side, don't worry about the fact that this is a busy slide, but we're talking about whatever you're using, Splunk or GuardDuty, I mean, first of all, please turn on GuardDuty. It is so worth it. But GuardDuty used to be watch your VPC flow logs for anomalies. And then we externalized this because folks said, we want to know. And so we have our own indicators, and we also consume some threat feeds. But this is like, take these and then automate. What are you doing with them? Are you building a security data lake? How are you protecting that data? Have that conversation. Cloud gives you this almost like unleashedness that can feel a little dizzying. But like, start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
This is a picture of me as a child because I own the rights to this photo, and that's what makes for an easier way to. I'm half joking, but half serious. I have 3 brothers. This is one in the back. But yeah, one of our security engineers, Beetle, always says this, which I enjoy because I'm a salty security lady. Who is not in sales and doesn't have to make people happy all the time, is to say, there are 2 ways to learn incident response, and one will be chosen for you. You can write your run books and your playbooks today, and you can tabletop it, or you cannot, and we'll find out. And I'm not saying that to be a jerk. I'm saying that because, that little part of your brain that just lit up that's like, we're not necessarily, when's the last time we tabletopped anything? When's the last time we talked about out-of-band comms? Do it tomorrow. The best time was today. Well, the best time was yesterday. The second best time is today, and the next best is tomorrow. Start somewhere. And if you don't feel perfect, that's normal. We aren't perfect either. Just start somewhere. Patching and hardening, I know, it sounds like a trope, but one, the best patching is the patching you don't have to do. So let Amazon manage it if you can. But keep, like I was saying, keep a list of the things that you know you should be doing and do them. It's going to break some. The longer you wait between patching, the more likely it is to break something.
Yep. I like to say, rip off the Band-Aid.
There we go.
Yep.
All right, so incident response in the cloud, as I mentioned, looks different. You're talking about logging and monitoring. You're talking about your security data lake. What are you doing with the last month of findings? How are you extracting insights from that? How are you putting lambdas on that, whether that's in the form of EventBridge, CloudWatch events, or whether that's in the form of just custom lambdas you're writing. There's tons of these that are publicly available, too, that you can take advantage of. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. But the idea is that, really what we're talking about is, are you getting the data that you need to make the insights that you can? And doing your signal to noise ratio. And there will never be a perfection point. You will just get better over time. And I think security metrics are tempting to gamify and just say, I found a way to make this metric look better. No, it should show whether you're actually getting better over time.
Yep, absolutely. And, just to go back to what Merritt said, because I think this is important, as a takeaway from the discussion today, we want you guys to do tabletop exercises. Tabletop a ransomware event. Be prepared for it, because what happens is, a bad day will actually come up, and it'll be super stressful to deal with it. Your IR team or your security folks, whoever is having to deal with it, is going to hit roadblock after roadblock potentially, right? And so go run through it, at least at the tabletop, maybe do a simulation. You'll make sure.
I recommend you do both, right? Do the operational folks running the run books.
Yep.
And then do the tabletop with your executives.
Inevitably, it's a people, process, and technology problem, right? But if we get those ironed out before it actually happens, it's going to be much less painful. We're going to know that maybe the IR team has the access they need instead of initially hitting that roadblock of, I don't even have access to this AWS account, for example. Or, hey, which account are our CloudTrail logs in? And how much CloudTrail data do we have? It's like, those are standard things that they should know about absolutely across the board no matter what. They should also know where the ELB logs are for ELBs in every account. Right? Are they in the same account? Are they in their own account? Which bucket is it? Is it a standard naming convention so they don't have to guess? These are all things that make it so much faster to get through an incident and figure out, number one, was it actually an incident or did it just ring the alarm, right? And so definitely as a takeaway, put this on the list. Do it tomorrow.
Today, tomorrow.
All right, so let's talk about advanced features for data services and databases, because there are some changes that have happened over the past 6 months, and also features that have actually been out for a long time that I want to make sure you guys are aware of that can change the mean time to recovery if you have a security event. It's game-changing, literally. So first of all, if you're not familiar with AWS Backup, it is a central service that allows you to do backup of your AWS resources. You can apply access policies and restrict who has the ability to do on-demand or schedule backups, who has access to those backup vaults, so you can really restrict your backups down. You can actually send them to a different account in a different region. And just in October, the AWS Backup team announced vault lock capabilities on the backup vaults that you can enable. So if you're concerned with something like ransomware, that's something you should enable on your backup vaults. What vault lock is the write once, read many, or worm storage. So once you enable that on your backup vaults, it means someone can't accidentally go and delete your backups, accidentally or maliciously.
Right.
That's huge. That's game changing. So want to make sure you guys are aware. Exactly.
Vault locks that are so cheap.
Yeah, you can do object lock with S3, which is that same write once, read many. So if you have super sensitive data that you want to make sure is there all the time, no one can change it, turn on object lock for that bucket. Versioning has to be enabled prior, but, and you can also do this in S3 Glacier. You can vault lock your access policy to your Glacier vaults. So this is something where like, hey, we have log data, it needs to be there for a year, and this is the policy for that 1 year it has to be available. We want to make sure no one can change that policy. So we're going to actually lock that access policy in Glacier. Lots of capabilities there. There's just an example in the policy there. Now, for databases, we actually have some advanced features. For Aurora, you can actually do database cloning. Why is this relevant for ransomware at all? It's actually, if you have a clone of your Aurora database, you don't need to do a snapshot restore that could take hours. You just have your clone and you can respin it up in 5 minutes, you're active. That's amazing. Talk about lowering the mean time to recovery there, right? We also have point-in-time recovery for RDS and DynamoDB. This is granular per second backup. So you could literally, you have 35 days and you can go back and determine when you want to roll back your systems. And again, it doesn't impact the performance of your database to do that. So really changing the game as far as mean time to recovery for your data stores that are highly sensitive, operations critical. These are additional features that, you know, even as security practitioners, we tend to overlook. And I want to make sure you guys know that these are there to help you with your recovery.
Yeah, I love this. I feel like, so I had a conversation with the CISO, I don't know, a month or two ago. He was like, yeah, I get that I can get back to a known good state. How would I know my known good state? Well, we were talking about Aurora Databases at that point. This is a managed NoSQL database. It's like, well, you would see, so we do a practice of canaries. There should be some that always fail and some that will always go through, right? So you can, again, coming back to that reasoning element, like you can know that you've done what you think you've done, and you validate that by deploying it, you know, by testing. And it was like, I guess your canary will be if you see the data drift and you weren't expecting it. So like, this is one of the beauties that I'm talking about where I think cloud scale functionality, it's not a security service, it's the way that you approach security and how you think about those. So this is my cue to move into this one. So using managed services, using CI/CD pipelines, obviously, the best patching is the patching you don't have to do. Taking advantage of the parts that can be on our side. And we're increasingly moving that line up, right? Because we hear customer feedback that that's what we want is for us to take more. So bring me more feedback, but for now, I mean, I would say certainly take advantage of the fact that we have managed services where less of that falls on the customer side of the shared responsibility model. These are Arbor Dogs who happen to be both adorable and kind of similar. We happen to be like pug crazies. I don't know if
Anybody
do we have any pug lover? Oh yeah.
Yes.
There's always, it's like a cultish following.
It is.
So we'll see you after this. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, the point is, I think, it was an old trope that we would say, treat your servers as cattle, not pets. Now that you're in the cloud, you don't have to worry about that rogue server. But I would extend that and say, treat your architectures as cattle, not pets, right? You can use ephemeral and immutable. You can templatize, come back to a known good state. So sometimes this will take the form of golden AMIs and AMI Builder and taking advantage of that. And sometimes this will be cloud formation, which obviously is spinning up physical infrastructure on our side. But to you, it feels like code. And it feels like simple JSON that you can mostly read, or YAML, or, it's fairly human parsable, and we also help you parse it. So taking advantage of that just mentality around, on the one hand, if you haven't updated any of your architectures in 4 years, that would be a problem. But on the other hand, you're going to accrete your knowledge over time and refine them. And one of the things that we do internally and that I encourage folks to do, obviously, is you don't need an on-premises backup. You can use cloud to do the same functionality. You just air gap them. Reduce your dependencies and keep them as siloed as you want. Okay, well, we're kind of wrapping up here, and lucky for you all, have 8 minutes to take your questions. But of course, as promised, this was probably kind of unfulfilling, because you're okay, well, there's a lot of stuff that they covered that sounds good, and it's not perfect, and yeah, that's kind of right. That embrace that useful discomfort, start somewhere, get a little better in some of these aspects, and think differently about the ways that you approach your architectural decisions, the ways you approach your executives, the ways you report, if you are an executive, the way you report to the board, and how you think about those metrics and what matters. But yeah, this is not gonna, there's no easy button for security. We kind of knew that, right? And this looks like hard work, right? There's an Aristotle quote that's something like, excellence is not an act, but a habit. You get better over time, and you just continue to exhibit it, and you will get closer to there.
So here's some resources for you guys to go find or learn more about ransomware. We're doing a lot of additional guidance. There's been several blog posts and white papers. We've mapped a lot of our services to the NIST CSF, which is helpful. It's the most common security framework. So we're listening to you guys. You're asking for more guidance. Here it is.
And No More Ransom, which is on that community highlight, is a list of known decryption libraries. So if your ransomware attacker is not sophisticated, you might be able to actually decrypt it yourself.
Great, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, this is how you can reach us, and we will take questions.
Yep.
Well. No, go on, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, any questions? Look, you have us here.
Yeah.
So on the, we talk about GuardDuty and least privilege also. Is there a way to, and we
do you mind speaking into the mic just so that
Can you hear me?
folks are using
Okay.
headsets? Yeah.
Talk about GuardDuty, least privilege, also region lock at the SCP level. We've done all of that. However, it seems that AWS has enabled some of those regions that we are never going to use, like Africa and things like that. Is there a way to get those disabled at our level so we don't even have to turn on GuardDuty and protect it?
Yeah, you can use a SCP policy to do it. There's some examples in GitHub, actually.
Yeah, so we have the SCPs saying not to use those regions, but by default, AWS turns on some of those regions, and so the recommendation is you still should run GuardDuty and protect it.
Yeah.
And so it creates additional automation that we need to do. I didn't know if there's like a feature request where we could say, we're never going to use these, so don't enable those.
Yeah, so for new regions that we put up, there's the capability to not enable them or disable them. With regions that have already been released in the past, we can't go back. So using SCPs to say you can only build in these regions or having GuardDuty enabled is the best way. But I hear what you're asking for. You still want the ability to disable the previous regions. So,
Yes.
Yeah, we will bring it back
Yeah,
to the
thanks.
identity team.
Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you mind speaking in the mic? Because if folks are using headsets or...
Do you know if for IAM there's plans to enable more than one U2F key for accounts. Right now, you can only associate a single hardware token to an account and or use it for the CLI. You know if there's any plans to do that?
I don't.
I was gonna ask the identity access guys.
Yeah,
They're handing out
I think it's
YubiKeys.
sort of that,
I wouldn't be surprised if there's a PFR for it.
yeah, product feature request. Yeah, I think, so come talk to us and we're happy to talk. And obviously the identity folks are here too. You know, identity is one of those like sticky areas that everyone works on and it feels painful because it is, right? Because there's all these exceptions that we all need because we're human. But I think that there's elements of what you're describing that are on the roadmap. So let's talk about it after.
So, question about S3, air gaps, and object lock. So, object lock looks really good, except you can also disable object lock with the root account. So, when you're looking at specifically around ransomware and,
Sir, you just said
and
a curse word.
the root account, yes,
No
I know.
using root.
I know that. Everybody knows that.
And it
Well, I
was
guess you
fun.
could. I guess you could disable it through SCPs.
Exactly. Yep.
So, but when you're looking at air gapping, and I mean, I guess when I put on my paranoid hat, I go to advanced persistent threats, and how far do you really go? That's
Yeah.
probably more of a risk-based.
Exactly.
How much money do you want to spend, and how much effort? Right now, I've got a customer, and we're trying to air gap, that's encrypted S3 buckets, and moving them over to another account in another region, air gap, and encrypting them over there. And then possibly putting object lock on it over there. But, I mean, does that seem reasonable? I mean, what do you see people doing?
So one, I would start by saying like, do not use root for anything, right? Everything
know that.
should be, roles and it should be federation and should be SSO. Like, just that gives me alarm bells just to start. But I think that what you're describing is something that we can approach. I mean, like the kinds of capabilities that we were talking about are accessible if you're talking about federating out. So if you're talking about creating roles that then will create vaults and backups, like that's doable. And you can also put the requirements that everything in that bucket be encrypted, and you can kick out everything that isn't. Is there anything I'm missing here?
Yeah, so I've seen customers like exactly what you said. It's a risk-based approach. So for very large financial services customers, some of them are already multi-org. So when they think they want an air gap-like solution, they bring up a different org. If they're not multi-org, does it really make sense to bring up a different org? Probably not. How about a different OU with very specific
Organizational
SCP?
unit, yeah.
Yeah, that is like, hey, only S3, maybe some Lambda for automation so that we're not doing any human access. We're pulling data over from another S3 bucket, using that automation, kicking off from an event bridge rule, for example. And it's a subset of administrators with access to those accounts that's only federated, for example. And quarterly access reviews are on those roles, anyone with access into the AD group, for example. So yeah, I mean, you can go several layers deep as far as like using that AWS account, the organization, and the OU to get as air gapped as you want and to really like push that level of security to something you're comfortable with.
And by the way, I'm going to come back to the root issue. If you don't know whose contact email is the one that we would call from AWS support, go check that. It should be an alias, not like John who left IT last year. Because when we see anomalous behavior, we reach out to customers. But if you're not answering the phone or the email, like if it's John who left IT 2 years ago, so like think through those root account decisions too, because we do best intentions, but we rarely turn things off. So you are in charge of maintaining that updated contact info, and that's really important. It sounds silly, but it's really important.
Super
Go check,
important.
like, if you haven't checked lately, who is your contact info for us? And is it one of your subsidiaries? Is it like a person who left a year ago, whatever? It should be an alias. And it also should be someone who can respond within 15 minutes. I mean, like this, yeah.
Part of your incident response plan too.
Sarah, can you get on the mic so everyone can hear you?
That should be part of your incident response plan too, to go through
Yeah.
that on a regular basis, at least.
But
you
just
really-
do like quarterly reviews at least. I mean, like, I don't know, I would say weekly, like, and double check that you're, because if it's not part of your employee, like, life cycling policies, that's, you know, part of it too. But it should be an alias that then you update with your LDAP groups and so on and so forth, so. Yeah.
So I'm actually new to AWS, and we're trying to build security around our business endeavors of moving all of our stuff out to AWS Cloud. I have a question on the IAM Access Analyzer.
Yeah.
Can it actually search out through your entire organization and find locally created accounts out there? So
What Access Analyzer does is it'll compare IAM policies and tell you authoritatively which one is more permissive, and it'll also identify escalation routes. And now that you know you can put those fine-grained policies on not just users or roles, but also on resources, like a computer is better at parsing those. So that's the value, is that it can suggest pruning to you, and it could identify, like, this human hasn't used this in a while and probably shouldn't have it if they're not using, you know, like, it does, it's a computer that reasons about the permissions that have been defined. And while JSON policies are, like, fairly readable or YAML, like, if then, but when, you know, like, and everything congeals into, like, a, you know, mix of stuff. And so I think one of the benefits of AWS Access Analyzer is that it'll help you reduce your characters and simplify and kind of beautify your, like, make more elegant the policies that you write, but also identify stuff that you didn't realize that you had, like, left a little bit open to interpretation, let's say. Meg, I can tell you have one more comment.
Yeah, you're looking for a way to inventory how many IAM users are in the environment? Is that?
Yeah, and obviously trying to limit those and make sure, you know, understand what they actually have access to and you know, what level of access they have to it. But really, you know, being able to run that and say, okay, well, we have this many local accounts in AWS, and we need to work on getting rid of all of them.
Yeah, today there's not a way. I mean, you could write a script. You could easily script it.
I mean, this would be, yeah, your users, right? Like, you're permissioning them.
Well, if it's a static IAM user, like, you know, have
Yeah,
a file to
using
run
it,
through all
yeah.
accounts to spit out anything that with a static credential,
Gotcha.
right? That's probably what I would do today.
And then I have one other question on the, so one of the best practices is to not create, or I think you said give all of your developers full admin access to everything in AWS. So one of the best practices is not to have the local accounts created. Definitely not, you know, giving them all admin access. But one of the things you need is your break glass for your AWS accounts. That has to be a local account, and usually that has to have elevated permissions to be able to do that breaking of glass. So how do you handle that to make sure nobody gets access to that specific account?
Yeah, so I've heard of customers doing it multiple ways. They kind of treat it like a domain admin almost, where they have like a separate set of accounts. Back in the day, we called them A- accounts, where it's like, you don't use this day to day. And anytime it is used, you get a notification that somebody did it, and you better have a trouble ticket to figure out why that was used. So that's,
I think there's lowercase p permissions or policies here, right? Where you're, like, usually there's a ritual involved, or, like, there's someone who, and I've seen it even be, like, we had an iPhone and it ran out of battery. Just remember that, like, some of these physical hardware tokens have batteries in them. So when you're talking about breaking glass, like, regularly check it and make sure that it's still working. But there should be more than one person checking it. Like, it's always got to be a ritual.
And you can give that account only the access needed to either reactivate another account as opposed to giving it access across your entire AWS environment, correct? So you can give it the ability just to, let's say, enable an account from somebody who left the organization or something like that, or
Well, that will just be federated down, right? With all the permissions that you've already put in place. But when you're talking about break glass, you're talking about, like, what about that root moment? And I would say put that with MFA, with everything in a vault, and literally.
and alerts, because it alert on it when it is used, because it shouldn't be used day to day.
Yep.
right? That you're talking about, like if you're using a third-party federation.
Our minder
Service.
is here to tell us that our time is
are we
way
getting
up.
booted?
Yeah.
We could talk for hours.
Thank you, and
you so
come
much.
chat with us.